We're going to look at demo exercise 7-1, enhance the Town Hall homepage. So what it's going to ask you to do here is to continue on from what you worked on in Chapter 6. So we're going to add a link that plays video, we're going to do some formatting of the lists on the page, and work with the navigation to see that we have this drop-down two-tier navigation menu, they call it right here. So if you see on About Us, it drops down to our history, board of directors, etc., etc. All right, so it's going to have you open up where you left off in Chapter 6. I'm just going to move this over here so I can have a little access here. All right, and so it wants you to add the HTML for the main navigation menu. Okay, and it wants you to use the figure or the image on there, the other page, as a guide just to make sure that what you're doing is looking like that. So number 2, you're going to add a nav element with ID nav menu, okay, between the header and the main elements. So you've got the header on your page, then you've got where your main element starts. So you want your navigation to be just below the header but before all the content on your page. So that's why you're putting it between the header and the main elements. And so basically you just start with that nav, NAV, between the two, I like to call the lesser than and greater than signs. And then inside there, give it an attribute, give it a name. ID, we're going to ID it equal to nav underscore menu, and it has to be in quotations. So that's because later on when we get into our CSS to make it look pretty, we're going to identify it with that name. Okay, and then you also want to add this UL tag, and it'll give you the closing UL when you do that. So just click in between and separate the two. And then I want you to, on number 3, add the first LI, list item, element there. And you'll see we've got 1, 2, if you click on them, it highlights the opening and the closing for you. We're up to 3, 4, 5, okay? And then they start to look a little different. We'll talk about that in a minute. But 5 main elements on your navigation bar. Okay, so inside each one of these, we want to be able to tell it, when you click on that, where is it going to go? Well, in order to send someone to another page, remember we need that hyperlink reference. Where is it going? Tell me where to go. And how we use that is our A tag. So number 3 asks you to also add an A or anchor element to this list item with the hyperlink reference of where it's going to go, and they tell you what to set that attribute to. Set it to index.html, and then the text we're going to set to home. So in between our A tag, our opening, and our closing, A tag is where we're going to put the word home because that's what's going to show up on the page. And then the attribute for that opening A tag is our href equals index.html, okay, with the open and close quotation. So that's all you need to do at this point to that. Number 4 asks you to copy the LI element you just created and paste it 4 times to create 4 more list items. So that's always the best thing. Once you get it working, you know that it works, then you just take all of this, copy paste it multiple times. Then all you need to do is to change the text that's inside the href. Where are you sending it to next? And the name that's going to be on that navigation button. So the next ones are accordingly, as you can tell from the image that you were given. It's speaker, luncheons, and then tickets, and then finally About Us. Okay, so number 5, it says set the class for the first link to current. So right inside this first link, right after the hyperlink reference, that's where you're going to give it a class name. Class equals, and then in quotations, current. And so why we do that inside there is because that's going to say that the anchor tags inside the list items that all look like that are part of a class. And if I use the class name current and I apply styles to that, that means it's going to apply to every style that has that same format. Okay? You'll see later when we get into the CSS. All right, so that section right there, 2 through 5, talked about HTML. 6 through 9 is going to talk about making changes to the CSS. So we're going to make that navigation menu actually look like one? Because right now, if we were to look at the page, it's just going to show um, like an unordered list, bullet list, if you will. Okay, so number 6 on the CSS, let me jump down here. It says to add a style rule for the UL, the unordered list element of the navigation menu that removes the bullets from the list and sets the margins and the padding for the list to 0. All right, so for all of the UL items, so here is where it's a good point where you put in comments. Okay, so that you know that this section now is all talking about the navigation menu, because when you start to get lots of CSS on the page, it can get crazy. I've heard some people, some programmers will alphabetize theirs so they can find them quicker. It's really a preference, how you want to do it. I kind of like it divided by section, so I can go right to that section and know that everything in there applies to that one area. All right, so here we go. We're looking at the nav underscore menu, the UL element, and then we start our opening close brackets. We put inside there what we want. So what does it say? Well, we want to remove the bullet, so how we do that is list dash style dash type and then none. So we don't want any bullet styles on it. We set the margin to 0, the padding to 0, and then that's all we do at that point. Number 7 says to add a style rule for the LI elements in the unordered list for the navigation menu. Okay, so let's look at that, because that's your clue on how you're going to actually code this. And it's kind of in a backwards manner. So if we look on line 55, and I'll read this. It says add a style rule for the LI elements within, in the unordered list for the navigation menu. Okay, so that's how we can build that out if you get a little confused, or just read the words backwards. And what it says is to float the elements to the left. So float left. And that's so they can be displayed horizontally. Basically what that's saying is our first one, which is our home button, and then we have our, I forget what was next, the luncheons or whatever. By floating left, then they kind of literally float up off the page and align in an order, starting with the home button aligns to the left. The next one pops up right next to it and aligns until you go all the way across. So that's what the float left means. Okay, number 8, add a style rule for the A elements. Okay, remember, we're going to read this backwards. I'm looking at line 58. A elements within the LI elements, so right here, that displays these elements as block elements. Okay, so we know that we need to add in the UL and the nav menu because, that's what we're talking about right now. So we want them to display block. You see that on line 59. We set the widths accordingly, okay, to 1/5 the width of the body element. So 1/5 of the width of the body element. So you need to go see where it is set for the body element. Up here, the width is 800 pixels, so 1/5 of that will give you that number that we have down here, the 160. It's a little math you have to do in there. And then align the text for these elements in the center of the block. So text align center, line 61. This style rule should also set the padding above and below the anchor tag elements to 1em. So padding 1em above and below, so top and bottom. So that's the only thing that we're doing that. So we can do the shortened version. We don't need to do all 4 because the top and the bottom are the same with 1em, and then the left and the right we're doing 0, so just put a 0 next to that. That's on line 62. And then remove the underline from the links. So text decoration, set that to none, so that removes the underline. And then set the background color to hashtag 8 and then 5 zeros following that. Okay, and if you hover over, you can see that's like a red color. And then set the text color to white, so color white. That will show up nicely on the red background. And then set the font weight to bold. Font weight bold. So it pretty much gives you everything that you need to fill that out. All right, next you're going to add number 9, add a style rule for the current class. Okay, that sets the text color for that class to yellow. All right, let's just stop right there for a minute. So remember, we set just inside the anchor tag, we set a class for current. So on line 68, we're using inside the nav menu, inside looking at the A tag, dot current. We don't use hashtag there because we're looking at the class. And we're going to set that color to yellow as identified on line 69. All right, then you're going to test those changes and adjust any CSS until you get it right. Okay, number 10, moving on. I'll let you do that and then you can troubleshoot anything you need to. Number 10, we're going to add a UL element within the last LI element in the navigation menu. All right, so what does that look like? We're going to, then add 4 LI elements with anchor tags that, let's see, where was it? That contain the text shown above, but don't worry about setting the value for the href attribute of these elements. Okay, so there's a couple things going on there. So you're going to add a UL element within the last LI element. Okay, so we've got let's see, we've got a couple things going here. Let's go back over to this page here. Okay, so we're going to look at our HTML. So when they talk about adding a UL element, that's all HTML. So at the last LI element, which is about us, it says to add a UL element, and then inside there add the 4 LI elements along with their anchor tags and their hyperlink reference, their H reference. Now we don't have these pages created yet, so we're going to put the hashtag in there in between the quotes because we don't know where those pages are going to go just yet. But you can see by the diagram, the image, it shows you what to name these. So our history, board of directors, past speakers, and contact information. Okay, so now we need to go back to the style rule now that we've created those, because we need to set the positioning for the main navigation menu so it uses relative positioning. Okay, so back up here for our unordered list, our ULs inside the nav menu, that's where we need to add our position relative. Okay, number 12. Add a style rule for the submenu that uses the display property to keep the submenu from being displayed by default. So in other words, we don't want to see the drop down. We don't want to see that drop down show up unless someone has actually clicked on that About Us. And back up to number 11 when it talks about the relative positioning, when we have those submenus pop down on the About Us, we want them to stay in the same location and not, relative to the button, so they're not floating all over the place. All right, so to add the style rule for the submenu that uses the display property to keep the submenu from being displayed by default. Okay, so this is down here. So remember we've got our nested ULs. We've got the one big UL on the nav menu and then this nested UL on that last list item. So we want to position that as absolute and the top 100% from the top of the main menu. So use top 100%. And again, it's display none because you don't want it to show up by default, only after it's been clicked. All right, number 13, add a style rule for the list items in the submenu that keeps them from floating so they're displayed vertically. Okay, so down here on line 76, looking at our nav menu, inside the first UL, then into the nested UL, and specifically those list items. So the reason we have to do this is we don't want it to change any of the list items that are floating, or excuse me, that are in the main navigation, those initial 5. We don't want to change that, just the list item inside that last drop down, and we set float none. So now they're going to be displayed vertically instead of like when we had the navigation menu, we wanted the buttons to float so they're horizontal next to each other. We don't want that with this case, so we want to take that float off. All right, number 14, add a style rule. It causes the submenu to be displayed as a block element when the mouse hovers over the list item that contains the submenu. All right, so that's the trigger that's going to make that submenu drop down. So again, line 79, we start looking at the nav menu, inside the unordered list, looking at the LIs, and specifically the hover feature. So we need to use the colon hover. And then we've got that greater sign saying UL, okay? So that's saying the list items in that unordered list submenu, when we hover, display block. Okay. Number 15, you're going to test those changes. And when you point to the About Us menu item, notice the first item in the submenu is displayed on top of the main menu. All right, so I'm going to give you a minute to do that. I'm going to get rid of, if I can. It's not letting me move it, of course. Let's see. This is not good. There we go. Maybe. Okay. So if we go ahead and we're going to start it so we can take a look. Whoops. Always do that. Get back on your index page. Okay. We're going to show it. And you should see, I'm going to open this up a little bit. When you hover over the About Us, you should have these options here. And the next thing we're going to do is just this little style. You notice how we hover and it gives me the little italics feel to it to show that I'm actually on there. We're going to do that in the next little bit here. Okay, that's if I can get to that page. It's hiding behind here and it won't let me move it. Why is there always something, right? Okay. Next. We'll just get smarter than the page. All right, so now we're going to add one more style rule for the after pseudo element of the navigation. I'm looking at number 16, so let's go back to our style rule. And right here on line 82, we're looking at the nav menu, at the UL tags, after, and what does it want us to do? So the style rule should add empty space following the navigation menu. Clear the content so it doesn't float, and display the content as a block element. So here's what it does. So for the content, it's going to add an empty space. So an empty is the double quotes on you see right there on 83. Clear both because we don't want the content to float, and display it as a block. Then you're going to test that page again. Okay, and then finally, number 18, we're going at the bottom of the Speaker of the Month copy. Okay, so back over to our page, Speaker of the Month, right here at the bottom. We're going to change or meet us there. So let me show this really quick so I can see. Okay, or meet us there. We're going to change it to or play video. That's what it is. Okay, so right down here, instead of it saying or meet us there, we're going to change it to or play video. So that's right here. Change the wording. And then it's going to play the file that you've been given, samson.mp4. And we're going to include that in here. So on that href, we want to pull up, we go to that video, Let's see, we're going to change the bullets in the unordered list. So at the bottom of the page to circles. Okay, so you want to do that. So go back over to here. And, oh, I think I went too far. There we go. Line 117. Okay, so we have to look at within the section, because that's where those bullets are. In the unordered list, we want the list style type. Usually, if we don't want to remove those bullets for like our navigation, then we put none, but in this case we want to make them circles, so we put the word circle. Okay, and then number 20, you're just going to validate it like we usually do. I'm not going to go through that because it's the same thing every time. And make sure that you don't have any errors. I'm going to get on my index page and I'm going to view it one more time. And you can see that we have our video down here, and our bullet points down here are no longer bullet points, they're actually circles. And there you go. Okay, hope this was helpful. Thank you.